Welcome to Cabbage Cafe, everybody.
Absolutely, it worked this week. Yeah, we'll take it because last week it did not. We went to YouTube, through an audible at Rick. He got us hooked up, and then now it's been posted on the page. So we're back at it. We should probably just start adding YouTube from now on. And I should have thought about that and planned for it. Did not, because that worked out well.
You suck, Jamie. You suck.
We will start doing that from now on. Just everything takes a little while, especially for me to get up and running a little bit. But this is working, so we're good. And today's going to be we got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Obviously, we had a good interview. The Democratic Cannabis Caucus, hosted by Rick, interviewed our Attorney General Dana Nessel. We got a lot of good stuff from that to work with, and that's ongoing. And a few days later, we interviewed 3 of the progressive candidates for county prosecutor who are still in the race. And the one person who we really liked a lot from Wayne County, who is no longer in the race, came on with us and helped to conduct this discussion and really did a great job. And we got a lot of great information out of that discussion too. So toward the end, maybe we'll recap that one a little bit, because I think there's some really good stuff to work there, and thinking about taking care of some of this stuff on the countywide level, as we're finding it a lot more difficult than maybe we had hoped on the statewide level to make some of these inroads as quickly. So that'll be interesting. And we're going to be joined today by attorney Joshua Covert, who's been on the show before. He's done a lot of work in activism as well as criminal defense for many people in cannabis world, and the prosecutions and the arrests and things like that keep coming. And he's recently taken a case that was in press in Bay City. And we're going to talk to him a little bit more about that. Don't know exactly what happened. Generally, the media essentially says that there were illegal sales coming out of the shop that, which is a not commercially licensed dispensary. So that was conflict. I think the issue for me, though, is not that there's a question about, whether or not he needs to join the formal commercial world in order to operate freely. It's, the methods that we use to shut the businesses down. In this case, there was a raid, there was arrest, there's charges, 8-year felony charge that was in the paper. And that seems excessive to me. And part of the statement I think that the people made when the MRTMA passed was, we don't really need to view cannabis so harshly anymore. And yeah, there are things here that need to be dealt with, if it's true that these transactions are taking place, and that. But I don't really like hearing about this method. And earlier, or at the end of last year and earlier this year, there were some raids on like club type places, farmers market or private club type situations too. I think all of these could have been handled civilly, and the effect would be the places get shut down, and we don't waste time and resources on arresting people and charging them and disrupting their lives and taking items of value and taking it to that extent.
Yeah, and perhaps there should be some type of penalties, but jail time. I mean, you can't just let people just do whatever the fuck they want to do. We all agree. It'd be nice if you can, but there's no way that's going to happen. But jail time is ridiculous.
And in the act, it does point. I mean, what comes out of the act, language is in there, and it's for interpretation, and then there's implementation, and there's practice, and what actually happens, remains to be seen. But it does point the judges to look at these things as not that big of a deal unless it becomes really habitual.
Right. Or unless you get some kind of crazy or a rabid prosecutor who just wants to go after someone, and we know of many instances of that. So
I heard of another case yesterday or early this morning. I think it was late last night. Somebody was in a car, pulled over and caught with, I think it's 10 to 20 pounds. And that's all the information that there is. And the person is being charged with intent to deliver with remuneration, or whatever the new, wording that they're using for this now. So And I don't think that there was an admission or other evidence that pointed to it being delivered anyplace. But this is the route, and reminds me of old times. You know, this is the type of thing, you have some cannabis and immediately all of the charges of possession and intent to deliver and all that kind of stuff come with it, no matter what the surrounding circumstances really are.
Right, right. And then they sort it out later. They just pile all the charges on and sort that shit out later.
That's the way they do it. I mean,
I know, yeah.
You look superficially at the facts. A prosecutor assigns some charges sufficient enough to bind somebody over or to get them jammed, and then you just negotiate away. I know.
That's what I'm saying. They pile them on because then you can peel them back, but they're always going to get you in the end.
Yep.
But you know, Josh has got a lot of experience with this kind of shit. You know, I'm anxious to hear what he's got to say because I know he's tough and I know he's gone up against a bunch of these crazy prosecutors and judges and shit.
At what time is Josh joining us today, Jamie?
It's after he's done with a meeting, but we're estimating about 4:30.
Oh, so all right. One of the first things. Good deal.
So this wasn't done as a typical question, but this was kind of what I was like to discuss. I mean, we've all weighed in except for Jim. So Jim, maybe if you want to weigh in, maybe we can discuss it a little bit more. You know, there has to be some type of enforcement. There's some lines here. There are commercial rules and that type of thing. But does the continuation of raids and felony charges and things like that need to be used in order to stop, you know, this type of cannabis activity, in your opinion?
Jim, you're on mute, sir.
Of course, he had a lot of great shit to say. He started saying it before he thought.
I don't think so, but I mean, not to that extreme. Obviously you want to have people that are law abiding, that follow the rules, but there's better ways to handle things now. And I think we're starting to realize that with law enforcement, that we have to start figuring out better ways to handle it, things that they should be responsible for and shouldn't be responsible for, whether it be mental care versus, you know, criminal acts. But definitely, you know, tone down the military gear and helicopters and raiding with everything and throwing people down. And cannabis is not a violent drug. So.
Right.
Well, it's been demonstrated how it can be done civilly. It was done in Mount Pleasant. That's what the McQueen case was all about. They didn't
Sometimes
have raids.
the compassionate apothecary case.
Right. Yeah. And they determined that illegal sales inside of that commercial building constituted a nuisance, and that gave the municipality the right to shut the place down.
They used a nuisance law against us in Chesterfield Township. The Attorney General, Bill Schuette, joined in with the township prosecutor to come fuck with us and sent a prosecutor down from Lansing specifically to assail me in court. Was kind of messed up. But the fact is, as Jim and Jamie and Deb all agree, we do need some parameters. We do need some guidelines. We do have to, you know, say what's what and then enforce it. But the number of tools that are available to do this is pretty great. The Marijuana Regulatory Agency, if you just send a letter to a guy like Eric Owens and say, look, we're aware that you're doing some things you're not supposed to do. We need you to stop, and we're giving you a notice. I'm sure that probably would have resolved the problem without having to go all this way and end up with felony charges.
I agree. Same thing for some of these other clubs and things that I referenced before.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and so I imagine, you know, some of these other old school kind of tactics that are here would make me think that they did something like had the informant, whatever they're being called now. I know there's a different term than the CI or something now. And they made the purchase and recorded it. Now they know that this transaction took place. And you know, at that point, the decision can be made. You mount a paramilitary invasion, or do you tell them, you know, stop doing this stuff, or you're totally out of business?
You have to understand, let's take a look at this in a bigger perspective. One of the reasons why they don't do the civil process is because there's a court case involved. Anytime there's a court case, there's a chance you're going to lose. And if you lose a court case on a raid like this, that means that kind of gives the go signal to other people all across the state that, hey, look, you can engage in the same type of behavior and the courts will protect you. So they go the route that doesn't allow courts to have an opportunity to say no. So in this way, they preserve the old school techniques while still accomplishing what they want.
Yeah, but there's a civil, that's not true to a point, but there's a civil process that I mean, they You can might stave it off if you have something pertinent at one level of the process when you're being noticed, when you're being notified that you can't do this anymore. But if after that the behavior continues, there's not much recourse. At that point, you put a lock on the door for up to a year.
Yeah. Well, the civil and the nuisance lawsuit does require, those court proofs and things like that too. The penalties are incredibly high. Jamie keeps talking about putting a lock on the door. He's absolutely right. What that means is if you lose a nuisance lawsuit, that particular property is considered non-habitable for a year. You can't walk into it. You can't, if the pipes burst, you can't fix it. If there's a fire, you can't go inside. Nothing for 1 whole year. It's a significant heavy penalty, and I don't know of any landlord that wants to risk that on their property if that was the way.
There's several strip clubs on 8 Mile that have been closed for, absolutely, they ended up going out of business about it because they found minors in there and they called it a nuisance, shut it down for a year. And really it's like it goes back to nature or something. That's the weeds start to creep in, like you say, the windows are falling. Yeah, so it's a big blow to a business.
It's a heavy penalty. So that itself, if you're a landlord,
it's huge.
Or if you're the actual guy who owns the business, that's a significant thing for you to consider when they talk about a nuisance. Now, everybody, a felony is no small penalty, let me just tell you. But
should it ever be a penalty? It should or ever be a felony, in my opinion? No, never a felony. This is all civil stuff to me. Come on, I understand the law and I understand the progression because, I watched it, being written, but to me, that's just bullshit. It should never be a felony.
You're right, Deb, because it's like we can see where laws are headed and we can see where minds are being changed. And it's like we can have these old archaic laws and archaic ways of handling things like we used to. But that's definitely getting phased out. So I don't know why it takes so long for that transition to happen.
But it's not really that long because the law's only been in effect for a couple of years, really, but still things move so fast nowadays. So it just seems like it's been taking so long. But yeah, the stuff is outdated the minute it gets voted into. People are already progressing past it. Yeah. So.
Still, well, we've talked about this many times before. There's still the long time foundation and infrastructure that's been at work for many years in a certain way, and some things have changed, but not the entire system.
Yep, that's
true.
Stuff
remains in place.
Sometimes, in order to change the system, you need to change leadership, and you oftentimes hear this when they talk about changes at police departments. You have to change the culture. If you have a group of people that immediately want to go to the paramilitary raid and they always want to charge people and they always want to get in there, that's a cultural thing that they've been told is the way to be. If you change the culture to say, these are citizens, we don't want to put people in jail unless we absolutely have to. This is essentially a victimless crime, the transfer of cannabis. Come on, nobody's getting hurt.
Right.
So when it comes down to that, if your culture says, hey, this is not that big a deal, but we do still have to do some enforcement, then you're more kind in the way that you go about enforcing the laws, as opposed to the harsh raids and felony charges.
Right.
We're in this transition now, and I think as we continue to communicate from our various positions, whether it's a person who just concerned citizen or Democratic Cannabis Caucus or another type of group or organization, kind of putting the pressure on those who can make the decisions, who are the leaders, who aren't getting to this maybe as quickly as we hope, but who we want to encourage to still work on it. It's a matter of time, hopefully, if we do this right. But there are those forces who are working in the exact opposite direction. And then we talked about this before too. You see this series of what I call pseudo studies. They're in study format, as if somebody's concluded something, but they are all correlative and may do this, is linked to this, could, that type of thing. And it's all about, yes, cannabis is really good, but if you don't use it properly, or if it's not controlled, or if there's too much or something like that, it could be really bad and dangerous. That's all a setup for more restrictions and prohibitions, and to get rid of, individual rights and to keep more of the stuff, even in difficult circumstances in the commercial world. There's a manufacturing group in Michigan that is seems to be kind of poised to take on that kind of an approach.
And oftentimes in this industry, as in other industries, money talks. Money is the big determinant of where power rides. So you see a small cadre of individuals pushing legislators to do things because they have enough money to be able to significantly fund a campaign. There's a lot of influence peddling that's gone on within the cannabis industry towards the legislature since we started working with the legislature in 10. Really, I mean, way back then. There's always been forms. The MCDA, Michigan Cannabis Development Group, remember? They had the lobbyist that they hijacked.
Yeah.
Yep.
Totally.
Yeah. So, and then also those two guys in Pontiac, those crazy dudes who decided to run a. You remember we met with them, Jamie?
Yeah.
Yep, the guy with the cowboy boots and the bad attitude, right?
There's been all types of weird shit over the last few years.
Had a beer tap in their office. They would sit there and.
Oh yeah. Oh, they had a picture of
Really?
the bathroom. Yeah, that was weird.
Really, they had a really bad picture of Gretchen Whitmer in the bathroom, framed in the men's room, and she's got a microphone in her hand, and she's
Oh my God.
They're horrible. They're terrible people. They're some of the worst, and yet
Didn't
still
we see some kind of crazy painting in that house at that fundraiser for Dana? What was that?
That was awesome. Where the woman was punching Donald Trump in the face.
Yeah,
Yes.
in the face, and his face was like splattered. It was like a huge painting. It was hilarious.
Yeah, we've seen some really, really amazing things in our industry and met some really wonderful people. I like our industry because our folks have eclectic tastes. You never know what you're going to run into. Gordie Howe is a pirate, and every time I see Gordie, he's like dressed like a pirate. At least he used to. That's always fun.
Maybe he's involved in the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. That's some of the behaviors that come out of that organization. You dress up like a pirate.
Like a pirate. I like
pirates. You made it up, actually.
I like that.
I did not make it up. It's what goes on.
Okay.
It's the truth. It's what goes on.
Yeah.
So we had last night. Rick had to duck out on Medical Mondays, unfortunately, and you are doing much better now. There's no question about that. Hopefully the arm is doing better as well.
Hand is still swollen. You can see versus the other.
Wow.
Right.
But
it's way smaller than it was yesterday.
Yeah.
I got that picture on Facebook for those of you who are trying to figure out what we're talking about. I got a bee sting on the back of my hand, and my hand and arm swelled right up like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. So I've got a photo on Facebook. You can really take a look and see the difference between the two. It looks like another human being. Really, it doesn't look like the hands belong to the same person.
That's why I was terrified. I'm terrified of bee stings because I got stung on the foot when I was a kid, and my foot swelled up. It looked like a pig's foot. I had like a pig's foot attached to my calf. It was so awful. So I know how bad is it itchy and really awful and
Yeah. Well, I got hydrocortisone creams and things like that too. But I did talk to my cousin who's an MD. I have a couple cousins who are MDs, and Dr. Pat says, "Look, man, you need to consider getting an EpiPen because every single time you have this exposure, it gets worse.
It does.
You're old now. Get used to being old now, and that's what old people got to do, man.
Yeah, you got to carry needles around with you now.
Fuck no.
Well,
that was a fat finger. That was a really fat. Here's a normal finger. Here's a fat finger.
Yeah, well, don't get stung around me. I don't want to stab you in the heart with no damn needle.
No. The EpiPens, I guess you do them in the thigh or something like that.
Yeah, but I'm gonna go right for the heart. Right?
Pulp Fiction,
yeah.
So
I want to make sure it works.
That one or more of the Medical Monday dudes would be able to make it on. Jim's coming back on.
Yeah,
He's
you
back
better
home on
let
his
him in.
computer. And they had somebody who's in the industry and cultivation from Oklahoma last night, and there's some things that go on there that I really like and wish that we could move into our program here.
Gentleman's company name was Robot Farmer.
Yeah,
Wow.
and they've been there since the beginning of Oklahoma's medical cannabis licensing.
Mm-hmm.
He's worked in Washington State a little bit too. He's done some branding and stuff, and in and out of the cannabis industry, and from Texas originally. And they seem to have a pretty good operation there. The testing situation there isn't nearly as strict as it is here. The ability for somebody to get the license, if you're from Oklahoma now, it used to be you could come from anywhere and get one of those licenses. They've now made that a little bit more tight, and there are residence restrictions, for getting those now. But for a total of about $3,200, all things considered, your license and all these extra little fees that go along with it and stuff, you can join the commercial ranks, and you can grow stuff in your house, on your own property, on somebody else's property. And if it's good to be in the market, it's good to be in the market once you have that license.
Wow. And how many plants?
There doesn't seem there's plant count licenses, but those small farms that aren't the big commercial ones obviously aren't going to exceed any type of a count or anything like that. And many of them are involved, and as a result, and I asked him, are there quality cannabis and diverse quality cannabis now inserted in the market because of the smaller farms? He's like, of course, all over the place.
Yeah.
It's one of the, and it would make sense here, given where the caregivers have already taken on that role just to keep things floating, and now kind of unceremoniously being dismissed at the end of this month. I mean, we'll see what happens, but it would only make sense.
I don't see them sidetracking that. I think that the caregivers are going to be exited out of the platform. And right now is such an inopportune moment for them to eliminate another source of cannabis, because cannabis is in such short supply in the medical and the recreational market. The pricing has gone up significantly. That's my understanding. I don't typically go to provisioning centers or recreational stores because I have a great caregiver, an awesome caregiver, a wonderful caregiver. But the fact is, I hear people on social media all the time talking about how supply is so limited and so short. It seems political, in my mind, to eliminate caregiver supply at a time when the industry needs it. It really seems like that's a power play, backing the large corporations in order to help force some of the smaller guys out, because large corporations with deep pockets can pay for cannabis no matter what the pricing is. But the smaller guys who are running on a thinner margin, when the price escalates for their supply in and their number of retail customers goes down because of increased pricing, they're less likely to be able to survive. So
yeah, the people can't afford dispensary prices, not people who really need, this. They can't. I don't know anybody who can pay that kind of price on a regular. Maybe, as a recreational thing on the weekend or something, but on the regular, who the hell can afford a dispensary? I don't know.
Well, when you have a direct caregiver taking care of your health too, and I know everything's moving to adult use and medical use is losing its flavor for whatever reason. That's never going to change. It's always going to be used medically. So to take away caregivers takes away an opportunity for these real sick patients to have something that's tailored to their needs.
I agree.
And we shouldn't peel back
too. Both.
We shouldn't peel back anything that's been achieved. There's no reason to, and yet there are plans to do just that and to open up the act this year and try to homogenize things, or that's at least the guise that some changes are being made under, and then to put it into lame duck to be voted on where there cannot be any changes can be made without any input. So that's something that was revealed during our interview with Dana Nessel that's being worked on, and then I have heard about that from some other sources too, and some of the potential changes that could be made would just be the fact that they open up the act at all is kind of unacceptable. But getting into the details, the intent of changes is unacceptable as well.
This composition of legislators is a bad one to entrust, changes to the medical or recreational marijuana laws with. We have a Republican House and a Republican Senate, and the last time we had that, and they messed with the rules. We get the MMFLA, which has, as I think everyone agrees, a ridiculously strict testing standard, has exorbitant price structure in order to get in, and they've had to fix this law, came out of the legislature multiple times in order to do things like expand who can be involved, give further details, and change the way that we do testing as well. So I don't trust this group of lawmakers. They don't actually represent the character of the state. Last time we had an election in 2018, all of the major offices that are voted on statewide were given to Democrats. That's the Secretary of State, the governor, the Attorney General, and of course our Senate positions too. The other districts are so gerrymandered to favor Republicans that they've been able to essentially guarantee themselves a majority in both houses, even though the majority of Michiganders are not in support of their party.
And this is a scenario too that a lot of the Democrats may go along with, depending on what information that they get and from who. Mm-hmm. This requires a supermajority vote, and it's happened like that before. And you're talking about people that are going to be told that this is just a simple administrative move. It's just got to be done to make sure some things are in line. But it has a lot more implications than that. There hasn't been enough time with legitimate stakeholders to scrutinize the implications of the potential changes. Certainly, there's no indication that anything's being done to correct issues of the past of incorrect implementation or lack of implementation of even the NMMA and its people who were in charge and making interpretations at that time in such a way to specifically be obstructionists. I mean, we're going to open up the acts. Let's do something that makes sense with it, not this. So this, hopefully, we can intervene a bit and at minimum push it to the next session.
One thing we don't want to do is we don't want to see an increase in the excise tax, which is currently at 10%. It's one of the lowest, if not the lowest, in the United States. It's a real incentive for people to come and work and start businesses here, especially the suggested reason for the increase. There's a suggestion that they would increase the excise tax in order to give that extra money to law enforcement. We saw the MMFLA created by the legislature, and they gifted money from our program to law enforcement. When we created the MRTMA, the adult use program, we eliminated that because cops shouldn't get paid from cannabis cash, right? If they're right. That's just
now no longer have to worry about cannabis.
That should be the law. The law should say that cops should never benefit from cannabis.
Well, they do from not having to worry about it anymore. So whatever resources they used to direct at it, they now can use in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need additional funds.
It's offensive as fuck. I mean, I'm just, every time I hear that, I just get,
it's so ridiculous. Consider where we did decide to put the excise tax: schools, roads, a program for veterans and PTSD,
and back to the locals for discretionary use. Now, if they feel that law enforcement needs more of those funds, they can make that decision on that level. That's how it's designed.
Yep.
They need less funds, law enforcement
too. Public service announcements serve a good cause, especially if everyone's eyes are glued to their TVs and their computers, and really like put out information that can educate people about cannabis and take away a lot of those stigmas. Because all these things going on in the background, really, it's missing that piece, I think, for just the general public. We don't have that.
You know, if you look at what the state of Michigan does for things like SIDS, the sudden infant death syndrome, or for AIDS, or for almost any other healthcare related, even the flu. They have big posters, they have charts, they have handouts, they have little flyers that say, avoid this, save yourself. None of that guidance for cannabis people. None of the encouragement, none of the, here's the reasons why we don't want you to drive with cannabis, here's the reason why nothing. So when you look at...
do a lot of that. They take the lead on that.
And that's great, but that's oftentimes a mixed message, because now you're taking the individual interpretation of law based on that particular distribution center's attorneys, and you're presenting that to people as fact, whereas another distribution center's attorneys may have a different interpretation. So that's why it's so distressing to me when I hear how they want to spend money with police officers and things like that. There are so many ways we can more wisely spend the funds that are generated for this, or support our patients and our consumers more. I see we're joined by Josh Covert. Thank you for joining us today, Josh.
Hey, thanks, Rick.
Jamie?
Sorry,
the mute monster.
Got to do it every once in a while. So good. We're joined by Josh, as Rick said, and man, Josh has been a great supporter and activist and everything, in addition to being a great defender of people who are having legal issues with cannabis for a very long time. So Covert Law in Lansing is definitely I know that, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on here was to discuss as much as we can about the case from Bay City that you just picked up, and just what was in the press about that. But the bigger picture we were discussing earlier is, how cannabis cases are being handled at large. There were some issues at some private clubs or like farmers market type things toward the end of last year and earlier this year, and in different places around the state. And instead of taking a more civil approach, the raid and arrest and forfeiture of property and all that kind of stuff was used just as if there has been no change of consciousness about cannabis or other approaches able to affect closing down the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've certainly seen all different types of approaches. I can recall here in Lansing within the last year or so, a few different places that were allegedly distributing adult use marijuana without a licensing, participating in that giveaway sort of buy something, gift marijuana. And in Lansing, they were given the opportunity just to shut down. They were approached by local police, local authorities, and they were told like, hey, you don't have the license to do this. We're asking you to stop. And in those cases, from what I'm familiar with, people stopped, and that was the end of it. And I think what we see in certain cases is the marijuana, tobacco and marijuana tax enforcement doesn't seem to maybe follow sometimes what locally we might see. And so here in Lansing, I think the individuals were fortunate enough to deal with local authorities before the state police got involved with their tobacco and marijuana tax enforcement team. What we saw in Bay City involved the Michigan State Police, and had it been dealt with by local authorities, it may have went different. I don't know about Bay City, but I can say certainly in other communities it's been handled differently, and I think that's certainly the preferred approach.
I think that I'm not positive, maybe you would know, I think that the state police or state police division, that's dedicating itself maybe to this cause as we're talking about, could choose to take the civil approach also, could do the same thing.
They could. They certainly could. I can't say I'm aware of an instance where they approached someone in the more civil approach, meaning send them a letter, stop by, tell them, hey, you should stop doing this. They've seemed to take a little bit more aggressive approach with raids. We've seen them enforce raids in the Flint area within the last year. And then I know there were some up north. I can't remember that were also enforced within the last year. Those have all seemed to be the raid style approach. Ultimately, I don't know how it's going to get handled, because ultimately it's going to get handled at the local level with local prosecuting attorneys. And it might be a little different approach, but the state police certainly seems to take the raid approach as of right now, from what I've seen.
Josh, would you like to maybe summarize the recent case? I know that as an attorney, you are some things you can say and some things you can't. And if you summarize what happened, then we'll know where our parameters are.
Yeah, well, I can say I've been retained on the case, and I can give some of the background in regards to what the news has said. There are allegations that a store in Bay City delivered marijuana to someone over 21 without having the tax license. That's the allegations. The charge that came about because of that was the standard old felony charge for delivery, possession with intent to deliver or manufacturing. It's that one charge that encompasses all of that. And in this case, they're charging him with delivery, almost as if as if the MRTMA or Prop 1 never took effect. Essentially, they would be alleging that the delivery of marijuana for money would fall outside of the parameters of MRTMA and the protections of MRTMA, and therefore we would revert back to the public health code and the former drug laws, which would make delivery a 4-year felony.
Now,
that's what's going on.
So isn't that okay? So the fact that it reverts back and then these felonies are present, is that connected to the fact that cannabis still sits as a Schedule I drug on the state's controlled substances list, or is that separate from that?
That's part of what's contained in the public health code. The public health code is the body of law that contains the penalties for, selling drugs out, that sort of thing. Cannabis was one of those because it's on the controlled substance list, like you mentioned. And I would say most all felonies went away with MRTMA because MRTMA specifically addressed that conduct and either made it lawful or provided for alternative penalties for that specific conduct. For instance, if you possess more than double the amount you're allowed under MRTMA, let's say you have over 5 ounces, that could be a misdemeanor, but it's a non-jailable misdemeanor. Previously, that could have been felony conduct. And so a lot of what used to be felony is no longer a felony because it's specifically addressed in MRTMA, but MRTMA doesn't specifically provide for a penalty for someone who acts outside of MRTMA by selling marijuana. And that's kind of where we're at.
Now, of course, when we passed MRTMA, the Marijuana Regulation, Michigan Regulation Taxation of Marijuana Act, MRTMA, when we passed that, we didn't, remove any of the existing penalties from the code that you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Yep.
And most of them are removed somewhat by reference because they provide for there's penalties in MRTMA for certain things, and in there it says that those shall be the only penalties for that conduct. So in that case, if there's similar conduct under the old drug statutes, that wouldn't apply. But for something like what we're talking about here is the alleged sale of marijuana to someone over 21 without a license wouldn't be covered under MRTMA. And that's where they say we would revert back to the old public health code.
It's worth pointing out at this point that we could not have removed all those things from the public health code with the same proposal that MRTMA was, because it would have involved doing 2 separate law changes when we're only allowed 1 law change per proposal. So
yeah.
Okay, Jamie.
Is there something, this might be kind of abstract, but I wondered about this on another show the other night. I don't think I said it correctly to get the answer that I was looking for, but since the scheduling of cannabis is connected to the penalties, and the scheduling of cannabis is irrationally based now, in complete contradiction of the newer laws, is there something in the defense that could cross over into that kind of angle?
Make a logical argument that it should not be that way, that Schedule I is invalid because of the rules we passed?
That could be an argument that would be made. I think that's something that's possible. I don't know if we'll get to that in this case or not. I have to review the discovery and kind of see where the prosecuting attorney's at on this case. We haven't really had a chance to talk about anything. Remember I mentioned earlier that sometimes we'll see different responses at the state level versus the local level. And in this case, I'm hoping for a different response from the prosecuting attorney than what the state police did.
You mentioned that you'd been retained on the case. How's your client doing? Is he okay? I mean, he didn't get jacked up or anything, did he?
Eric's fine. Eric got released on bond Friday after we had the bond hearing, and Eric's doing just fine.
What day did the actual interaction take place, the raid take place?
It was Thursday.
So he was overnight in jail then?
He was,
yeah.
Which is rare. I don't see that a lot in cannabis cases where they arrest someone at the time of the raid. Eric has a North Dakota residence and address, and so I think that he was held by the police because of that, not necessarily because of the nature of the offense or anything else.
Potential flight risk, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, when they assess bond or put bond on an individual, that's one of the 2 things they look at. They look at likelihood someone's going to appear in court and the danger to the public. And I think in this case, the reason they brought him in is they wanted to set bond by the judge different than they normally would, because he could potentially be a flight risk because he doesn't live in the state of Michigan.
I dig it. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that he's doing well. That's great.
Was he ever applying for a license at all?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not able to answer that.
Okay. Well, I tell you, we thought we'd turned a corner on some of these things. It seems like there are still a few corners that need to have the cobwebs swept out, you know?
Yeah,
There are, but I mean, I can say that from going from someone that was getting cases about raids, you know, on almost a daily basis for years, I can count of 2 caregivers that have been raided and have contacted my office since November of 2018.
Wow,
And
only two?
this is 2. Both of those were able to keep the case outside of the courts after a
That's
police
good.
raid.
like those stats.
And so this is a problem, something I think we need to clean up, but it is somewhat of an anomaly in that, you know, I think for the vast majority of cannabis consumers, this type of thing doesn't happen. And I think it's definitely, we made a huge step in the right direction. Those 2 cases I mentioned, one of them was able to have the police come back out and see that he was in compliance in an agreed upon time. And they agreed to not pursue felony charges. One of my other caregivers got a civil, we were able to arrange a civil infraction ticket after a police raid, which is pretty rare to go from them raiding you, trying to, you know, trying to find felonies and then deciding to give you a $150 ticket when it was all said and done and stay out of court. So those are both, I think, good examples of when someone does get raided, it doesn't always mean it's going to be like it was in 2018 or before. We do see raids every now and then, like I said, much less than I would have seen that on a weekly basis, right? And I mean, now I'm talking almost 2 years.
As the Michigan
caregiver raids.
As the Michigan Cannabis Defender, you've certainly been there for an awful lot of people, especially pediatric cannabis situations. You developed quite a reputation in the industry for being an advocate for the downtrodden. So if you, of all people, are not getting those calls, I imagine it's because cases just aren't happening.
Yeah. Like I said, I used to get calls like that before November of 2018, almost on a daily basis, and then they dried right up, which is awesome. That's kind of what we all worked real hard to get MRTMA to pass and to see this happen, and it's good. It is unfortunate when we see things like what's going on in Bay City, but I think we have to remember it's not necessarily a sign that MRTMA isn't working. It's just a sign that we have more work to do. But MRTMA is certainly working, I think, for everybody here in Michigan, or most everybody that, like I said, we don't see the same types of arrests or raids that we did before.
Is there some continued cannabis enforcement type activity that you're familiar with, even though not as harsh, obviously, as you described?
Yeah, there were the 2, they were both local type raids brought upon. I never even got the affidavits for the search warrants because the cases never got that far. They literally were like, let us come see that you have the right number of plants and we'll do away with everything on one case. It wasn't even worth trying to get the search warrant. And in the other case, again, it was a $150 fine with one phone call. So it really wasn't, I don't know what brought those on. We didn't really get that far in the case.
Josh,
I wonder if it's because he's from out of state.
For Eric's, yeah, out of state is an issue. That's why our bond, that's why they held him overnight. And I think that's why our bond was a little higher than I normally would see.
We're so grateful for the fact that it seems like things have calmed down. You think this is a change in attitude, not just on the part of law enforcement, but also on the part of the prosecutors who decide what crimes they charge and what crimes they release, right?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, those 2 cases I've referred to about search warrants, I was able to work that out with the prosecuting attorney and on both of those instances with some phone calls, and they were really easy to work with. And that's not, I didn't see that a couple years ago. You know, I've been doing cannabis cases for like 8 years now, and I'd say the first 6 years of my career, I never would have gotten that type of response, or very rarely. But in this world, I say it's like a different world nowadays. In 2020, everyone looks at cannabis differently: law enforcement, prosecuting attorneys, and even judges. So yeah.
Awesome.
Josh, what's the penalty if you get caught smoking cannabis outdoors, and what's your source for that decision?
I would look at the penalty provisions of MRTMA, which is, I think, section 15 of MRTMA. And in there, they have the penalties for conduct outside of MRTMA. And I believe it's a civil infraction for smoking in public. I can't say I've had a single case come across my desk with someone being charged for smoking in public.
But you don't see any variance. You don't see any reason to question why that's the penalty. It seems pretty black and white, straightforward, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
There seems to be a movement in Lansing amongst Prosecuting Attorneys Association and others to quote unquote clarify exactly what the penalty is. And with the supremacy clause of the MRTMA, Josh, nothing else overrules that. That is the penalty, right?
Yeah, and it says these shall be the only penalties. And so there's a lot of conduct covered under there. I recently had a client sentenced for having over 4 pounds in his vehicle, and the prosecuting attorney charged him with possession with intent to distribute under the old laws. But I was able to show him that MRTMA covers that exact conduct. MRTMA says if you have over double the amount you're allowed to have, it's a non-jailable misdemeanor. And so we were able to handle that case real easy once I was able to show the prosecuting attorney that he couldn't actually charge my client for possession with intent to distribute under the old laws, because of exactly what you're talking about, is that was conduct specifically addressed in the penalty provisions of MRTMA.
Now, in all of these instances, the police keep the cannabis, right? They're not returning cannabis back to the persons involved. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is one of the other penalties. That's probably in some ways the more severe penalty, right, is to get your cannabis taken away.
So I just want to make sure that people are getting a full scope of what a penalty is. It's not just a ticket. It's a ticket and loss of your cannabis. Now, if that's a couple of joints you had in your pocket, that's one thing. But if it's 4 pounds, at $3,500 a pound, right? That's a significant penalty for you to have.
That was a significant penalty.
Yep. So these are not just minor offense slap on the wrist things. There's some serious consequences here, but not felonious consequences. Because again, cannabis doesn't hurt anybody, does it, Josh? It's like victimless crime, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. So my client in that case, it was a non-jailable offense. No probation. He paid court costs. Wasn't even fined. He just paid court costs.
So what we're seeing now is I don't want to use the term kinder, gentler, because I don't think that always applies, but we're seeing a more rational approach to cannabis law enforcement on the part of most prosecutors and local authorities. Would that be correct?
I would agree with that. Yes. Excellent. Even in areas that I hadn't always seen that before. Some of the counties I've been talking about are counties that maybe haven't always been reasonable about cannabis. I think we all know there have been some counties in Michigan that are worse than others and some that are better over the way it's played out since 2008. And in some of these instances have been counties that traditionally have been difficult to deal with are now actually very reasonable. So yeah, it's kind of refreshing.
Josh, you've taken cases up north too, area I like to call, north of the Knuckles, right? Up in this zone of Michigan, and even in the Upper Peninsula, if I recall correctly. Those are some really harsh places towards cannabis law reform, and you're not getting calls from those zones either.
No, I have one criminal case. I have 2 ongoing criminal cases right now. One of them involves cannabis. It's in the UP, and it involves allegedly driving while under the influence of cannabis, but nothing involving possession, caregivers, and nothing like that. I see a few calls about drugs driving, and that's about all that I really deal with nowadays, other than working with businesses.
Opine on that, the whole driving with cannabis in your system. I mean, that's something that really has been pushed by the Michigan State Police with this whole roadside testing. Tell us a little bit more about the laws regarding that and what the variants and concerns are.
All right. Well, the MRTMA protects you as long as you're not driving while under the influence. Under the influence is a specific term used in criminal statutes in regards to operating a motor vehicle. It's a standard that requires significant mental or the substance to significantly affect your mental or physical condition, and also substantially lessen your ability to drive. And so right now, the law states that you can consume cannabis, you can have cannabis in your blood, active cannabis, as long as you're an adult over 21. You just can't consume cannabis and drive if the consumption significantly affected your mental or physical condition and substantially lessened your ability to drive. So when I take a case like that, that's one of the things I look at. I don't really look at whether or not my client has cannabis in their system or when's the last time they used the cannabis. I really look at how is my client behaving, and are they able to show that my client's behavior was significantly affected by the use of cannabis. In law, we also have another standard that's quite often used when we're talking about other drugs or alcohol, and that's visibly impaired. Visibly impaired is a different legal standard that is also used in other drugs or alcohol, for instance. But because MRTMA and the Medical Marijuana Act both only prohibited operating under the influence, technically you can operate a motor vehicle while visibly impaired. And that's something I've argued in lots of cases, and I've had judges agree with me. There's even an unpublished case that states that, People v. Donahue. And I think when you handle a case like that, you really have to focus on how is the person behaving. So people say like there's a mouth swab, that we got these DRE officers. Really, all that's doing is saying that someone's used the substance, if anything, and that has no bearing on what somebody's mental or physical condition is. So, I really don't think these cases are difficult to proceed with as long as someone is behaving in a normal, reasonable way. But yeah, I tell people to not take the roadside swab, just because it's a fine and it's not going to do anything other than tell us all what we already know, and that you're using cannabis, assuming that that's what's actually happening, right? But then when it comes to, they're going to eventually arrest you and ask you for a blood test, or they may. And at that point, I advise people to take the blood test. At that point, you can face some more serious sanctions by not taking it. And again, I'm not going to be concerned as your defense attorney if your blood shows you have cannabis in it. That's not what we're arguing about. We're arguing about what was your mental and physical condition at the time the officer pulled you over.
So how important is dash cam or body cam footage in those cases? It seems like that would be really premium.
It is, but at the same time, we don't have a burden of proof. So if I can tell a jury, look, if they really wanted you to think this person was under the influence and their mental or physical condition was significantly affected, wouldn't they have brought in a video? So, I mean, I handle it both ways. I don't know that I have a preference with or without video. I see the advantages, and, I take what I got and work with it either way.
Excellent.
Haven't there been enough controversy and exposure of like bizarre practices at the labs, so even the like
state police crime lab, you mean?
Yeah, and yeah. It makes it difficult to say that anything means necessarily anything as far as how somebody was driving.
Yeah, the labs definitely have some issues here in Michigan. They were falsifying, not necessarily the lab, but it's that same department, is they were essentially falsifying data master records. Data master is the machine that they test somebody's alcohol, the BAC, the blood alcohol content with, and they were fudging some numbers on the calibration of instruments, and they got caught doing so. That was definitely a bad look for the Michigan State Police and their toxicology and labs. But ultimately, that's the thing, is an alcohol, a number means a lot, because if a jury believes you're above a certain number, that's all they need to know to convict you. But with a marijuana case, I look at it differently, and that is that number doesn't mean anything other than that person consumed marijuana before the test. And I keep it to that. They don't have experts that can come in and say that, well, that nanogram level means the person is this high, or their mental or physical condition was affected this much, because that data doesn't exist. So I know going into this case that I can ask these lab techs, well, okay, you tested the blood. It says he's got 10 nanograms. Does that tell you anything other than the fact that this person smoked marijuana before the test? And they'll say no, because they're not trained, one, to make any other determinations. They're not toxicologists. And two, that data to even make that assumption doesn't exist if we look at all the studies done by NHTSA over the years. So I really look at it like, and I'll tell the jury, I'll hold up that piece of paper and say, this piece of paper doesn't mean anything. We're agreeing that there's marijuana here. I don't even know why we got this lab person in here. I don't know why we're going through all this. It's not what the case is about. The case is about how is my client behaving.
Yep. Because that's really what it's about. When you're talking about a dangerous driver, you're saying in the moment at which they were observed by law enforcement, where were they being dangerous at that particular time, not the potential for danger, because we can all have the potential for danger and still drive just nice, right? It's how they were behaving. That's one of the reasons why we don't need a roadside oral test for cannabis, because you should be able to charge people based on their behavior, not based on their bloodstream.
Isn't it also connected to that list of things that it tests for because it's on the controlled substances list?
In terms of what the roadside test tests for, correct. It tests for other things than cannabis. Cannabis is on there along with other drugs that are federally illegal. And so I imagine when the manufacturer made it, that they put on the most prevalent federally illegal drugs, not necessarily on a state-by-state basis.
And of course, there are many of those drugs that are not on the schedule of dangerous drugs because they're pharmaceutical, right?
That is true.
Right. So, we have an inherent contradiction here where we see deaths directly related to alcohol conduct and driving. It's demonstrable. It's easy to observe and needs almost no proof that's so prevalent in our society. Alcohol and driving means death at times. Cannabis and driving never results in that. And in the cases, I know, Josh, you've had other cases with cannabis and driving. There's not really any correlation between actual physical injury and cannabis impairment, right?
That is true. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has tried many times to conduct studies to show that there's a correlation between impairment and nanogram levels, and every single test has come back that there is not a correlation. It's not like the tests come back and say, well, it's inconclusive, or the data doesn't really, it says no, there is no correlation. But yet NHTSA keeps trying to show that there is this correlation. I've seen studies that show the risk level of someone using cannabis and driving is similar to a pregnant mother, someone who's taking antibiotics, and I can't remember the other one, but those were the two that stick out to me, because I think somebody using cannabis and driving might be a little bit more likely to have an accident because they might be preoccupied because maybe they're smoking while they're driving. So there's maybe this little increase, right? But it's like I said, it's no different than the increase of someone who's pregnant. There's no way we would ever create a law that says, hey, once you get past 4 months, you're pregnant, you can't drive anymore, because there's a slight increase that you're going to create an accident, right? And it's the same thing with someone taking antibiotics. The antibiotics don't necessarily make them an unsafe driver, but the fact that they're sneezing or coughing or things might make them a little more unsafe. But we don't create laws saying, hey, if you have a cold, you shouldn't drive your car. And that's because we as society are willing to accept small risks from other individuals because we realize we present small risks to other individuals. It's when we get to these larger risks where it really becomes a society's concern, and cannabis doesn't rise to that level.
Yeah, all leftovers from the drug war.
Right on.
Go ahead, Jim. What were you going to say?
I was really, like Jamie, just saying yes, right on.
No, that was excellent. We're seeing a lot of changes happen. Some of the fetters of the tattered flag that was the drug war, some of those are dropping off and falling away, but not all of them. And Josh, you were a member of MI Legalized group. You were instrumental in helping us get the language right in the law in order to make sure that it was, workable and a program that could be voted on successfully by the people. Cannabis activism in a post-2018 world seems to have a lot less participants. I mean, a lot of people thought that once we got legalization, they didn't need to be activists anymore, and they've just dropped off the world. Isn't that what you've seen?
I think in some ways it's become less of a concern for certain individuals, but I still think there's a lot of work to be done. I think the laws that we've just been talking about in terms of operating under the influence of cannabis needs to be readdressed. And then also I think we need to look at what's going on with expungements, people that have previous records. And I think that's something we need to work with. And then also people, like Michael Thompson, who are in prison for cannabis is seriously a concern. And I think we still need activism. But I would agree with you that it seems like it's become less important for a lot of people now that not as many people go to jail, I guess.
Well, and go ahead, Jamie.
No, I'm just saying that now that we see a few things now, I agree. We probably haven't collectively been as active as in the past because there were some really good things achieved. But there are some things that are being worked on now, and some groups have been revived and new ones formed, and there's a resurgence of activity, and there are things to be worked on.
Well, let's not make any mistake. There were some actual people in real harm's way, in real danger. In the years before 2018, Josh and other attorneys helped people that were significantly jacked up by the system, losing their children to Child Protective Services, losing their home over an indoor grow, having cars seized, having their whole lives turned upside down. This is the evil of the drug war that we have spent a long time correcting. And when I hear Josh say things like, I've only gotten 2 calls like this since 2018, damn, that makes me feel good. Because, I mean, Josh, some of the worst cases in Michigan's history came across your desk, sir.
I've handled quite a bit over the years. Yeah. I've had, I would say, cannabis cases in over 50 of Michigan's 83 counties.
Bree Green?
In like 6 years.
I mean, Bree was obviously there were a lot of kids that were jacked up with the system, but Steve and Maria Green and their daughter Bree, that was just a tragic situation, and that ended up with a happy result.
Yes, it did.
Through your work, and we appreciate that. But so what else is going on with Cannabis Defender, Josh? What else are you guys doing?
Right now, we're mostly working on getting licensing or licenses for cannabis businesses. That's been something that I've kind of transitioned to as criminal defense for cannabis is kind of slowed up a lot. That's something that we enjoy doing here in the firm, and we've got more businesses than I could count up and running and licensed and selling product. So that's real exciting for us.
Ryan Basor has launched the Redemption line of cannabis products, and his office is in your building. What's it like working around Ryan? Is he a good roommate sort of thing?
Oh, yeah, it's great. Ryan's office is right next to mine, and we talk almost every day, bounce ideas off each other, and he's a great guy to have as an office mate here. He makes the office a lot better.
I knew that's what you were going to say. That's why I asked that question. No, we've all been friends for a long time, and it's great because activism is almost like a fraternity. When you go to college, you're hanging out with guys for 4 years, you do things, then you break up, and you still have a connection. Most of us have been doing cannabis law reform in the same sphere for way longer than 4 years, and we have a pretty nice fraternity of male and female advocates that regularly come through.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of this summer, for everybody, it's been tough. Dealing with everything with the pandemic, and it's been, I think, tough for some of us in the cannabis world, because quite often we would get to see each other at events throughout the summer, and those events haven't obviously happened this summer. So there's a lot of people out there that I didn't get a chance to say hi to like I normally would have this summer, and so that's been a little bit tough. But I'm sure here in the next couple of years there'll be more cannabis events, and we'll all see each other again.
That's great. Jamie?
I was just saying, let people know how they can get in touch with you if they're after some help with startup for their business, or need advice or criminal defense.
Yeah, you can look me up on Instagram. I'm the Michigan Cannabis Defender. We're the Michigan Cannabis Lawyers, or the website is micannabislawyers.com.
Well, make sure you tell Eric that we were asking about him, and we wish him well.
I will, for sure.
Thanks a lot, Josh. We'll talk to you in the next few weeks and get an update on stuff. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Man.
Yeah,
have a good
certainly.
day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Take care. Oh, that really warms my soul to hear things like, the cannabis cases are really coming down. There's a whole lot less.
It's true.
The silent warrior.
It's awesome. Yeah,
It is true. He's in Ingham County, though. I just want to point out. So, like, those cases he's talking about were there. To make a good deal with the prosecutor is easier there. I'm not discrediting what's going on and the numbers that he's seeing.
Well, he did say that he had cases in other places that had been harsh in the past, and it seemed like they take a new look.
No
now,
question.
so.
Yeah. No, I'm happy about it. I just wanted to point that out. Right. And that
segue right into the talk about the prosecutors conference.
That's it. So. The next kind of discussion that the Democratic Cannabis Caucus hosted after the Attorney General discussion was with the 3 remaining progressive candidates for county prosecutor. Ingham County, Washtenaw County, and Oakland County. Oakland County, Karen McDonald. Washtenaw County, Ellie Savitt, and Ingham County, Colleen Seaman. And she's an incumbent and has already started doing some good work. And the policies of Ingham County have been a little bit better than typical too, as she pointed out. So they wouldn't even have gone down a couple of roads like Oakland County may have in some of the local prosecutions and stuff like that. So as Josh said, the businesses locally were out of, were not in compliance and not in the commercial program properly, and they were told to shut down, and they did. Kind of what we were discussing, as an example of an alternative approach to it. So that's probably a reflection of the tone set by the prosecutor in some ways.
I love that he said that no caregivers have contacted him. What he said, a couple of years he hasn't had to defend any caregivers. So it means that the cops have just backed off.
And Josh Covert, Cannabis Defender, his name is everywhere. He's well known across the state, similar to Camoran, similar to some of the other well-known cannabis.
I was going to say, these guys are going to have to segue into something else because the cannabis law.
Well, he was a partner in the Nichols law firm at a very young age. Very sharp dude. That's quite an accomplishment. And then he started his own practice, which is doing very well. So.
Yep, Mike Nichols has been involved in cannabis law reform to one degree or another over the years as well. So, I'm encouraged by that. I'm distressed that Eric actually got charged with a felony. I think that Josh's statement about MRTMA having a rule that says anything more than twice this, here's the penalty. I think that's pretty.
I think he alluded to, this is what I get out of it. The expectation, the ideal expectation would be the state agency is content with shutting them down, and the locals, won't necessarily pursue huge, harsh, charges if that is agreed to. That's kind of what it's hoping on.
Well, what prosecutors like to have leverage. They like to have a lot of charges, like 2-year mandatory minimum for firearms possession, things like that. They like to have all those tools available to them so they can negotiate a deal with the defendant. I'm hopeful that common sense will prevail here, and that if Eric agrees to just discontinue the offensive behavior, that maybe something reasonable can be worked out. I don't think anybody deserves to have a felony for a victimless crime. Especially since I'm sure if there was a controlled buy, as was mentioned, I think if that was the case, I'm sure it was a small amount. Right. We're not talking about heavy weight here. These aren't people that are importing thousands of kilos from Colombia. Those people perhaps still have a whole different set of circumstances involved, but this is low level stuff. Let's just keep it low level for the penalties too. Yeah. Jamie, you're on mute, sir.
Yeah. Couple times right in a row.
I'm gonna take those out and make a hits reel.
But the situation with the prosecutors over, they have the incumbent in Ingham County, and her race looks good, although she does have to win it, and that won't be known for sure until November. But that does look good. Ellie Savitt is going to be the next prosecutor of the county. I think he's even unopposed, and even if he were, he could count on probably winning, under those circumstances. And then the tighter race is in Oakland County, but Karen McDonald, the progressive candidate in that race, still has a very strong race going on there. So we could have 3 progressive, and they talked about working with each other, showing an example of what to do. And we had Victoria Burton Harris has been on our show a couple of times over the last few weeks, and we've all, I think, realized her energy and her understanding of these deeper issues, and her description of what she would do to try to take care of them has been pretty energizing, and kind of wish she would have won, but we invited her to come on and ask these candidates questions, and she focused in on that type of thing, and has mentioned that she's going to follow up with them and keep the pressure on to do some of that stuff. So I thought that was really cool during that discussion.
She'll run again and win next time.
Yeah.
She's not going away.
This is the last term from where it's a pretty strong challenge. So, I mean, I would like to see that line up. That would be cool.
Successful politicians oftentimes have to run more than once before they're given the office. So she's got one campaign under her belt. She learned a lot. She'll be better positioned next time she goes after it.
It seems like the willingness to, to buck the trend and the ways to do it seem to be a little bit more accommodating, quicker on the, on the county level with the prosecutors.
Let me just observe something, that when lawyers want to do something, they're crafty. They are very industrious, right? So when a lawyer wants to find an argument for your case, they'll come up with some kind of way to twist things around to your advantage. Same thing is useful when you're trying to end cannabis law reform, right? If you have prosecutors that are really trying to get their police departments to stop sending them these stupid cases, lots of ways that they can do that. There's lots of ways. Plus, the information sharing, I think, is the more important thing. You've got a group of people who are free thinking and looking for innovation. When one of them discovers something that works, that's probably going to get duplicated in the other counties. And that's great for our people, So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and what happens, we'll have to see, but at this point certainly seems promising. And we do know some of the stuff that went on in Ingham County that was a lot more reasonable than elsewhere, so to speak. And she was the only active county prosecutor that openly supported Prop 1 during the 2018 election.
Yeah.
Up there, which is pretty cool as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I'll say this: we've seen an awful lot of posers, right, who throw up some supportive signals but don't really commit 100% to it, or as soon as they get in the office they are less supportive than they were on the campaign trail,
or it's going to take a lot longer than we hope. That's simple as that. The machine's pretty strong.
But I think these three prosecutors, once they get in office, provided all three of them do, I think they're going to make change immediately. I think it's something that they spoke from the heart, right? This wasn't. It seemed very genuine. I got a pretty good head for when people are bullshitting me, and I really get good vibes from all these people.
We've been led down the path before, though. So
true. We have to see what happens, but it does seem genuine. And describing the problems and the mechanisms to fix it so specifically in that discussion, I thought was
I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful, especially to have multiple candidates, not just like Jeff Irwin, like multiple candidates. Is really
They agreed to look at existing and even cases where the people are in jail, where the case is over, they've been convicted and they are jailed. Even look at some of that to see if there are potentially overreach, harsh penalties associated with what actually happened. And
awesome.
That was really cool.
One of the interesting things Victoria Burton Harris brought to the conversation, and she had done this previously, and we kind of revisited it in Jamie's presentation this last week, was the concept that on a county-based level, you could expunge cannabis crimes, and that if you expunged it on a county level, that would automatically require the state database to purge that information also. So that means that we could potentially have some level of expungement without legislative action, which is amazing to me. And if that successfully works, wow. I mean,
we hope they inspire counties that might, be close to leaning that way, and then help new candidates to come in over the years who want to do that stuff. If we can't, while we're working on a statewide level, that's moving slower than we kind of hoped that it would, but we're still doing all we can there, and it is moving in the right direction. It needs help right now.
Well, I could see David Layton, prosecutor here in Genesee County, going for something like that. If you want to just follow the I-75 US 23 corridor straight north, you've got Bay County, where they have an awful lot of cannabis businesses now. That seems like they'd be willing to do that. Go even further up 23, you've got that whole Lake Huron shoreline, where there's a lot of communities which are embracing cannabis businesses now. It seems natural that if you believe that cannabis should be distributed to people in your community, you should also believe that those expungements should take place. If that vehicle becomes available, I see a lot of counties legitimately wanting to take that route. It seems like you only have to do it once too, right? I mean, you just do it once to purge your old rolls and then you're done.
But there's an issue with, it depends on how extensive the part of the discussion was about. It depends on how far you want to go, how much of it you want to do. So at one point I said, people in jail and cases that are in the pipeline right now. And to start with that, because then somebody could potentially get free sooner or, right away. And, but as Victoria brought up, it's really expensive to do that. And certainly look at cases that are done and over with and nobody's incarcerated right now. That's important to correct a wrong, to correct an injustice. But you have to dedicate resource to choose which resources and how much for how long to dedicate to different projects. And it's difficult to do that. So some of the organizations she talked about may help do that. They might raise funds to help counties go through that stuff and do some of that work. That was part of the discussion too. So it's a difficult, long road. We might have to raise some money along the way, but I think there's some good stuff there for sure.
I'll tell you what, there's an awful lot of cannabis businesses in the adult use industry that are required to have a social equity component to their business plan. I think they would prefer to just write a check instead of forming a whole new social equity, issue within their company. Sure. And if you could convince the state that it would be fine for them to write a check to fund some of these expungement issues in counties, I think that would be a great use of those funds, of those dollars.
Good idea. Yep.
And a lot of the business owners I know actually are predisposed to wanting to eliminate those records and expunge them.
I think that idea a lot.
They sincerely believe that that's the right way to go. So I think
like
that.
Yep. So Deb visited a hemp farm, an official.
I did.
Hemp farm recently. Got out of the house for the first time since mid-March.
It was really cool too. And you know what else? Going on the main drag, going into Traverse City, there were 4 dispensaries within a 2-mile, new ones, House of Dank, within a 2-mile radius. Really awesome. So yeah, so we went out to the hemp farm, which is crazy. Oh my God, the stalks of these hemp things were like your arm, Rick.
I know. That's
everything
great.
was just kind of blowing, dancing in the breeze. There was some deer out there. It was just really awesome. Really cool stuff.
Was your first time out though since March?
It really is. I've done a couple of, I've had to make some deliveries to some patients, but I don't even get out of the car. I put the medicine in the trunk. I pop the trunk. They get it out. I go home. Oh. Seriously, I've been nowhere since March 15th. Yeah.
I must have been feeling good today.
For real. Nice. It was crazy. It was really crazy. And to be outside like that and, in the middle of the fields was just so cool. I fell out of the car. Dave said it was hilarious because we pulled up and as you crest over the hill, you can see, like the plots and stuff. And I'm like, there it is. And Dave's like, where? I'm like, what do you mean where? It's right in front of us. It was just spread out in front of us. And I popped open the car and just like fell out the door. I was so excited.
I saw a picture on the internet of Dave and a plant that was about his height or maybe a little taller than him.
Yeah, they were nice and bushy too. They're really beautiful and they're in flower and they're in about week 3 of flower. So they've got about 5 more weeks before they'll be ready. But the colas were big and they were huge.
Didn't know that it was hemp. It looks like awesome cannabis growing.
It looks like cannabis, dude. I'm telling you, it's got huge flower tops just coming out, just like arms and just beautiful.
And of course,
which strains?
I don't know. They told me. I can't remember.
Okay.
Now that's Mark and Tony up there who are just
Mark and Tony, right?
Not only wonderful hosts, they're just successful people to begin with.
Yeah, and they've expanded they've encouraged many others to get involved in this too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what their strains are, but what they grow for is food, CBD extractions, smoking hemp, which
they do a lot of smoking hemp, but like pre-rolls, packs of pre-rolls of smoking hemp.
So shit that's got good stuff like that,
Yeah.
Right.
It was amazing though. Just absolutely amazing.
We'll have them on soon.
Yeah, they've got a lot of stuff, in the works in the pipeline. They're familiar with the stuff that was going on with the tribe in the UP. They've been working with that same tribe. So it's kind of cool. Yeah.
The Bay Mills group from last week.
Yeah.
That was just a wonderful interview, Whitney Gravel.
That was great. I love that. That was the whole idea of that was so cool.
Right. And for those of you who missed that, you can find the previous episodes on YouTube or also on our Facebook channel at Jazz Cabbage Cafe.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Jim, can you elaborate on the effort of decriminalized nature in Ann Arbor and what the focus is now with collecting signatures and so forth?
Right now, thanks, Jimmy. Right now, what we're doing, we're asking all constituents in Ann Arbor, residents, registered to vote, to write their respective city council members, requesting that they support the DNA 2 language, which it basically allows for use of entheogenic plants and cacti in Ann Arbor, not the sale of them, just the use of them in possession, and making that the lowest priority for law enforcement. So we're asking, to write a letter of support to the city council members, and then in the next couple of weeks, we're hoping that we can get some of them to put it up for vote and have enough to have it passed before we get the changing of the guard. That's going to occur probably a week after the election. There are a lot of new city council members that we're also reaching out to as well. But we've been working with this group for a long time now and figure that we could, have the momentum to finish this with them. So, but if we have to start over again, we're going to do that too.
Wow, that was my question earlier, was were we losing some friendly members on the city council? And apparently we are.
Well, not necessarily.
Because you don't know the new people.
We are reaching out to them, and we're making sure that their constituents reach out to them as well, because it's important that they hear from them more so.
Yeah, I agree.
Had some unfortunate news earlier of a friend's nephew, young guy about 20, was out skateboarding late at night. He got bumped by a car and killed, and the car drove off and has not been found yet.
Where was this?
In Northville area. I'm not sure exactly where, to be honest with you. South Lyon, Northville, Livonia area, something in there somewhere.
Hit and runs are prevalent, I know. So,
I mean, I've met them many times at their family gatherings. These are good friends of mine who've helped me out a lot over the years. They're relatives, so certainly I've met them, and it is horrible. We're going to be going through a visitation tonight.
Oh, that's terrible.
I'm sorry to hear that. That stinks.
Yeah. So, didn't mean to bring people down, but I think like at some point where we'll kind of talk maybe a little bit more. But if we happen to cut out a little bit early today, then that works for me as far as.
I understand.
Well, I'll say, if I could say something about that, it's the time of COVID. I think that we see people very distracted on the roads, and because there's less cop presence, I find on the roads nowadays, people feel a little bit more obliged to do what they want and not pay attention. And if you are a biker or a skateboarder or something, you really shouldn't be on the roads. You should find a park to go to right now, because I don't think people are really of sound body in mind at the time on the road.
I know. It's getting close. We're now in autumn, officially, and people are looking at colder days, colder nights. They're trying to grab the last tiny bits of outdoor activity they can get before it becomes not possible in Michigan. And you're going to see a lot of what Jim was just talking about, people, paying attention to other things other than driving, and folks out doing normal behaviors, but in an abnormal way or at an abnormal time. Yeah. I myself have had skateboarders, and I'm not trying to disparage at all. I've had skateboarders cut in front of me as I was driving down the street.
Damn kids.
Clearly, they know that they have enough space to get through there. But as a driver, when all of a sudden they appear in my peripheral, it's a freaky situation.
It's scary. I've had kids on bikes, and I just shoot out in front of my car.
Yeah,
you're just like, what the hell?
And then
But it's your fault
if
if you hit them. So you better be careful and be watching. And like Jim said, you got to watch it everywhere.
So a combination of things, I'm sure. He shouldn't be out there, probably at certain times on certain areas, and the car shouldn't be distracted and that type of stuff.
Yeah, you got to do some defensive driving, dude.
So the accident happens, but then, instead of this is an accident and taking responsibility for it and that type of thing.
Yeah, some fuckhead just drives off.
So if somebody says, I'm not dealing with all of the possible associated shit that comes with this and splits.
Was he alone? By himself? Would anybody have a witness? I mean,
that's all I know is car hit him and sped off, and then there's announcements around the area.
How do you even
to try to get people to give any information that they have?
How do you deal with that? Somebody running your kid over.
Very, very talented very talented young dude. There was a lot of promise, it's tragedy. So anyway, that's, I mean, to be the downer, but that is happening. And I think you're right. There's a lot of components to that, and things are exacerbated by the weird conditions that we're under, the stresses, the extra stresses that we're facing.
And now we're in a situation where you can't even grieve the way that we would normally grieve in our society. Right. Typically, we have visitations, we have funerals, large gatherings of people where you recount the person's life and help people find closure. Closure.
Put your arm around everybody.
Have a good cry over it. Yeah, exactly. And that's just absent now, and that's going to make it more difficult for people to grieve.
That's true.
It's bad. Yeah. It's real bad.
The thing we're going to is outside with expectations of distance.
You better dress warmly, dude. It's freezing.
Yeah, I'm outside right now. I got a couple of things going on.
You know, I 50s.
Speaking of outside gatherings, how about that California wildfire sparked by a gender reveal party where they used a protective device in the middle of the forest?
So if you live there, don't you know that the conditions are like that?
Dumb fuck Americans.
Like, you got to be extra careful under those situations right there. Otherwise, what's been happening for many years is likely to happen again.
People think that everybody gives a fuck about the gender of their kid, that they have to have like big explosions.
These other idiots are the ones who do that. Yeah.
Well, when you have money and you're bored, then these type of things are really good too. I never see a poor family having a gender reveal party outdoors.
That's what I'm saying. We didn't even know. I didn't even know the gender of either one of my kids before they were born. They just whatever you got, be happy.
Only the rich start forest fires.
Yeah, well,
it's amazing.
It's just
for this reason. That's exactly correct, though.
Right.
In this age where we have all these new things to worry about, all these new concerns to focus on, and rightly so. These are things that are killing people. COVID. There are still some old school common sense things we still didn't master as a human race yet.
Did they at least burn their own shit down too, or was it just public property they burned?
I'm sure they had to drive a distance to get to the forest where they were going to do their gender reveal party. This is probably not in someone's backyard. I think it's
because I know a couple nights ago, people in Oak Park here were freaking out. Someone had set up all these, fire lanterns. Have you seen those Chinese floating fire lanterns? And they were dropping on people's roofs all through Oak Park, and people were freaking out. They were out there with their water hoses and stuff. I'm thinking, man, people don't even think when they do something like that. If something goes up, it's got to come down somewhere, guys. If it's on fire, what the hell?
So the Chinese paper lantern is essentially a piece of cardboard soaked in paraffin, and you light that. Now, there's a paper balloon type above it, so the hot air from the burning paraffin elevates the balloon and lofts it, and then they float away, and they're colored papers. It's kind of fun.
Cool
it's
as
kind of cool.
Hell, yeah.
But burning paraffin comes down sometimes as a little flaming ball of love from the sky. So might not be the best thing. There's plus it's glitter. It's trash that's gone someplace where it didn't belong. And if you got paraffin,
and they usually do many of them at once for.
It's be like a whole shitload of them. That's what I'm saying. People all over are like, oh my God, there's like raining fire in my yard.
Yep. Yeah. So that's the interesting thing about Chinese paper lanterns is what comes up must come down.
Yeah, that's like the old time fireworks. We used to try and get our blankets up when we used to take the kids, where the stuff would feel like it was coming right down on you, and you'd occasionally get a spark on the blanket. That would make it even better.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, Jim, right?
Yep. Some of those low bursts where, you got showered with ash and sometimes there were hot centuries. Right, yeah. I remember going on a Crossroads Village Railroad experience, which is sort of like Greenfield Village, but we have it up in Flint. And there's a coal burning, locomotive. And if you're sitting in the last couple of cars, you're really in trouble because the way that smoke goes, it lifts up from the chimney and then it comes right back down. Man, and those last couple of cars, you get a little.
But trains are so awesome, man. You guys got to go on train trips. Are awesome. They've got cool ones that go up through the north, up to Alaska and stuff. Be so awesome, like sleeping cars and stuff.
Yeah, I've not done that.
So cool. Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, I've been looking at that.
Take the train to Chicago.
Cannabis Express.
I've done it to Chicago. It's awesome to Chicago. I'm talking about to Alaska, dude.
Oh, to Alaska.
Yeah. Oh, you wouldn't want to do one of those Northwest ones? They go through the mountains and you're in a sleeping car that's all glass and closed.
Yeah. I would. That sounds great for 1 or 2 days, but to go from Michigan all the way to Kodiak zone.
Well, you take
Like
some
a
oils
2
with you, you know, and
a fly to California, and then we'll train it all the way up from there. That's not a
all
bad.
right, let's do that.
The other one, the snow trains. They got an Agua snow train. Awe train has a snow train.
Yeah, we should
That,
do that. Snow train sounds good. Sounds fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Pack
there's
the appropriate things that we need and head on out.
Down with the snow train.
You're down with it?
Down with the snow train.
Yep.
All
There are
right.
so many things to do in the United States of America and Canada. We have just a great environment to work with around here. And I'm constantly reminded that, you know, we bitch about the little things, but in other nations, people don't have food. They don't have running water. In other nations, people are actually subsisting on bugs in order to not die from hunger. So the riches of
Yeah.
this planet, you know, may be consolidated in our hemisphere, but they don't need to stay here. We need to do something better than just give Elon Musk a 70% increase in his wealth during COVID. We need to do something better. And as a people, we need to come together and figure out how that is. I don't have a solution to it. I'm just pointing out a problem. Which is another downer, just like Jamie.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what a downer. Let's talk about up north.
Guys, how about those car rental places getting all huffy and puffy about cannabis smoke in their rentals?
Yeah, dude. You
You
know,
know, I think
used to
cigarette
rent a car.
smoke's a bigger deal.
It's terrible. I used to rent a car all the time. I'm sorry to
Piss on
interrupt, but all the time. And they gave me a car that stunk of cigarette smoke one time. That
Mhm.
was horrible, and I refused to take it. It was so horrible.
Cannabis doesn't stick around.
No, it doesn't stick around like that.
No.
I actually, I've in the old days when they let you smoke in hotel rooms, I actually refused a hotel room because it smelled so much like
Well,
like.
that's what I did too. I said, I'm not taking this. They said, well, we put a, you know, some kind of a system in it overnight and it should be okay. And I said, come out and smell it. And the guy's like, oh, wow, it's not okay. So they gave me another vehicle, upgraded it, and was free, but still it stunk like, was terrible. You know, because people who smoke cigarettes, man, they're smoking cigarettes. People who smoke cannabis in in a rental car, you know, they might light a joint, smoke it a little bit, but it's not the same as that constant cigarette smoke.
If you've got a 2-pack a day habit, that's 40 cigarettes a day.
And it seeps into everything. 40. It's nasty.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a constantly having a cigarette lit at all times.
That's just ridiculous. But I do know people who rented vehicles to drive cross country or to drive to Vegas who've just said, fuck it, I'm just going to pay the $250 deposit. I'm going to smoke weed in my vehicle if I'm going to be on the road for 10 days. Fuck it. Yeah. You know, so it's cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Another stupid reason to bitch.
Right. Just have some, well, because they can't have cannabis friendly vehicles.
They really should.
Because we're all impaired, you know.
One of the things I was most excited about when Whitney Gravel said that they were talking about having tasting lounges adjacent to, but not inside, but adjacent to casino properties on the tribal lands. I've been saying for a long time, in fact, in front of the Benzinga crowd, when I was asked to speak there, I said, you know, the first casino to figure out a way to have some kind of a partnership with the cannabis tasting center, they're going to win. They're going to beat the other ones.
They have little shuttle buses, little magic shuttle buses, and
sounds like it's coming.
Yeah,
sounds like under normal circumstances, they were talking about incorporating it into the, you know, casinos.
It's tried and true. We used to do it at all the events, the local events. That's what you would have to get on the magic bus and go to the, you know, the medicating spot.
Yeah,
well, you know,
medication. I'm seeing them medicating while doing slots and stuff. That's going to go down.
That would be crazy awesome. Yeah.
Well, I don't see why not, really.
Although I don't gamble, but I might stroll through the floor just to smoke one.
I lose $40 smoking a joint doing slots for the coolness of it, the fun of it.
Well, you know, Vegas has programs, you know, they've got tons of casinos and they also have tons of cannabis dispensaries, but there's no integrated centers. You have to leave the casino property itself in order to get to some kind of a cannabis distribution center. Right. And then I don't believe you can smoke it on the street as you're walking back, so you have no real place to consume it. So
you can smoke it on the street.
That's what you do, although
yes, I do.
It's not like the designated spot. Nobody says, "Hey, make sure you do it like that." You're probably not.
Every second I was there. Where you can't smoke in your room. That's what you have to go down, like walk around and smoke. You know, so
that's what I did. Yeah. Right off, like 25 feet off of the hotel, there's about 5 or 6 people usually being discreet about, like, you know, smoking.
Yeah, especially in the old Vegas part on what they call Frontier Street.
But Rick is correct nonetheless. they don't encourage that necessarily. It's just what happens because of the lack of formal places.
So that's why the Bay Mills Group has an opportunity to create an ideal scenario here for cannabis consumption. One that not only other native tribes could emulate, but one that we could learn from. And once it's proven that this system works and that there's no real detriment, that may take down some of those, intellectual barriers that exist from people allowing this. The federal law is really the issue, though.
To compete with it, man. And that system is a lot more functional and desirable for the people in the marketplace. We should emulate that.
I know. Well, and of course, the cannabis industry, like many others, is an industry of imitation. When someone has something that's successful, a lot of other people try to adopt that model. That's why a lot of the cannabis provisioning centers that you're seeing nowadays they all look like Apple stores, because that's a model that proved successful out in California where they did that. So, why mess with success? If we have an example of how we can integrate cannabis distribution, consumption, and entertainment all together in the same system, that's just so attractive. I can't imagine other people not wanting to do it as well.
Let's do it.
Social lounges should do a version of that.
Yeah, I think we put a craps table down in Cannabis Council and we just turn that into a little thing. Matt Abel.
A good place to have it too, downtown Detroit, would be at the Jazz Fest next year. I don't know if anyone got a chance to catch any of the Jazz Festival streaming over the weekend, but I missed not being down there, smoking a big joint, walking around, listening to some smooth
This is
jazz.
what I'm saying, and you're not supposed to be walking around, but you do, which means you can, right?
This is some smooth jazz.
Smooth says it all. It's almost you have to be.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I'm ready to wind down if you guys.
All right.
That sounds good, James.
Where did Jamie just disappear?
You're now the host, Debra said.
No, I'm not the host.
It says Debra Young is now the host.
Oh God, I don't even see that. All right, well, I say that we can. What time is it? I say we can go home.
That's fine. All right. Listen, thanks everyone. Cabbage Cafe. It's been a wonderful episode. Thanks to Josh Covert for participating. Thanks to Jamie Lowell for being here too. Deb and Jim and myself.
Good to see everybody.
Yes.